On Halloween night in 2005, a fashion journalist named Peter Braunstein would disguise himself as a New York City firefighter. He would do this so he could gain access to a former fashion editor's apartment. He would then hold her captive for a terrifying 13 hours. Happy Halloween, everyone, and welcome back to Killer Concepts, the place where we talk about all things true crime. My name is Peyton. Today we will be talking about a man named Peter Braunstein, a man who was making his way in the fashion world until the night of Halloween in 2005, when he would choose to move forward with a plot for an unspeakable crime, altering his life and his victims forever. This case does come with a trigger warning, as it is a case of kidnapping and sexual assault, as well as discusses thoughts of suicide. Before we get started, please make sure to hit that red subscribe button down below and turn on any post notifications so you do not miss any future content. With that being said, let's jump right on into it. First, I'm going to tell you about the crime itself. On the night of October 31st, 2005, a 41-year-old man named Peter Braunstein, who was then an author, playwright, and fashion journalist, would disguise himself as a New York City firefighter. He would then make his way into the Manhattan apartment of a 34-year-old former fashion editor. Braunstein would get the woman to open the door by lighting 2 small fires or smoke bombs. I have seen both in reports, in the vestibule outside of her apartment. According to the victim, he would yell, "Fire department," and looking through her peephole, she would see the stairwell filling with gray smoke and a man standing there in a firefighter jacket and a helmet. He then yelled, "There is a fire in the building." She would let the uniformed man in, believing that he was an actual firefighter and that he was there to help her. Per her testimony, within moments, she felt the barrel of a handgun against her head. Braunstein would order her to get face down on her kitchen floor, where he flex cuffed her hands behind her back. He would lay down on the floor with her, where she could visibly see the handgun, and this is when he would say, quote, "I'm going to chloroform you." End quote. Holding a cloth to her mouth, she would smell a scent like nail polish remover, and this is when she would start to become unconscious. She woke to herself strapped to her bed and stripped of her clothes, only wearing a pair of stilettos and underwear. Peter Braunstein would then hold the woman captive for a total of 13 hours, where he would sexually abuse and torture her, chloroforming her multiple times. He also apparently had a video camera and was videotaping her. During her testimony, she would say that Braunstein told her that she was lucky to be alive. When Braunstein was done holding the woman captive, he would go on the run, but it wouldn't be hard for the police to identify who they needed to locate for the crime. He had told the woman who he held captive that his birthday was January the 26th, and that he had been fired from Fairchild Publications. She would recognize this name, as it was the parent company of Women's Wear Daily and the W magazine that she had worked for. Peter had worn a mask, so she couldn't identify him, but the two had been colleagues, although they never really knew each other that well. The woman would get to see that he had brown curly hair when he would momentarily remove his ski mask at one point. But she was under the influence of chloroform, and so she did not get too good of a look at him before she started to become unconscious again. When Braunstein left the woman's home and she would get herself untied, she would call another former colleague at the W. This man would phone the police and go with her to the hospital. After, he would make his way to the office of Fairchild's editorial director, Patrick McCarthy, to tell him what happened. After hearing the story, the man stated, quote, "Patrick's face went white because there are only 2 men who had been fired from Fairchild recently, and only one of them has curly brown hair. And Patrick just looked at me and said, 'Oh my God, Peter Braunstein, you've got to tell the police.'" End quote. The man would do just that, and the hunt would be on for Peter Braunstein. But Braunstein would end up eluding the police for 7 weeks, becoming one of the country's most wanted fugitives at the time. He was hunted by the U.S. Marshals, the NYPD, and law enforcement in 4 other states. The hunt for Braunstein would spark a media storm, and everyone would be covering the story, especially those in New York. He was even featured on America's Most Wanted for at least 5 episodes. He even spoke to the media a couple times while he was on the run. One of the times he had used a British accent. It was very theatrical. Seemed like he wanted attention. Braunstein would eventually be captured when he was approached by police at the University of Memphis on December 16th, 2005, after a woman had called the police after recognizing him from America's Most Wanted. When police approached, Braunstein shouted, quote, "I am the guy you're looking for," end quote, before stabbing himself in the neck repeatedly with a knife. He had said at one point that he never planned to get away from his crime alive, but obviously his attempt at suicide would not work. He would live and he would be taken into custody, being charged with arson, burglary, robbery, kidnapping, and sexual abuse in the 1st degree. He would plead not guilty by reason of evidence of psychiatric disease or defect. So how did Peter Braunstein get to this point? At one point, it seemed like he was a man on top of the world. In 1998, he was about to finish his doctoral program at NYU when he decided to become a fashion journalist. He got a job at the Village Voice, but got his big break when he began writing in 2000 for Women's Wear Daily and The W. According to Braunstein's father, he was a very smart man, one with an IQ of 180. He also was apparently good with the women. He had once been married to a teacher named Donna Keene, had a long-term relationship with another journalist named Deborah Michaels, and a relationship with the beauty director, a colleague at the W, Jane Larkworthy. However, Braunstein's relationship with Jane Larkworthy was a very tumultuous one, and perhaps could have been seen as a precursor for the terrifying crime that he committed on Halloween in 2005. According to a 2020 interview with Braunstein, his fights with Larkworthy would get violent. He would, quote, tie her up in a chair and grab a knife, end quote. But apparently the violence was not directed towards Jane. Keep in mind this is coming from Braunstein. And he actually was directing the violence towards himself, as he would threaten to kill himself, and had done so at least 3 times. Larkworthy would testify at Braunstein's trial regarding their relationship. Braunstein said that during the year before the attack, he felt that both New York City and the fashion industry had turned against him. He essentially planned the attack as a way of revenge on the city, his ex-girlfriend Larkworthy, and the fashion industry. Braunstein stated, quote, "I just felt like I was a stranger in the street. This entire city has let me down, and I'm going to spit in its face now," end quote. Perhaps these feelings of his were sparked by the rapid decline of his career starting in the spring of 2002. A Vanity Fair article states that colleagues of Braunstein's said that his behavior began to change. It was quite strange. With the success of his articles at WWD and the W, he apparently started saying things like, "he saved women's wear." People were saying that he was becoming obsessed with his own press, and it was obnoxious. He would begin having outbursts of anger over things and had a very hard time taking criticism. Vanity Fair said that in October of 2002 is when things for him hit an all-time high, as when, quote, "word got out that Plum Sykes, a young editor at Vogue, had received $625,000 of an advance for her first novel, Bergdorf Blondes." Plenty of writers were taken aback by the news, but Braunstein was outraged. The fact that someone he regarded as frivolous and marginally talented would be paid so much money struck him as proof that the New York media world was corrupt. end quote. The following week, Peter Braunstein would make a call to a publicist at Vogue. He would request a second ticket to that year's VH1 or Vogue's fashion award show for his girlfriend, Jane Larksworthy. But when Vogue denied his request, he became enraged, and he was freaking out at the publicist for this. After the outburst, the publicist would secure the ticket for him, but Braunstein's superior at the time would find out about the incident and would send him an email reprimanding him for what he had done. I am going to apologize for my language ahead of time, but Braunstein apparently replied with, quote, "Go fuck yourself," end quote. He then apparently would walk off the job. Braunstein had said that he was fired, but he pretty much fired himself with his actions and the things that he had done. He was the one who walked out of his job, and he's the one who replied to his superior the way he did. But all of this is what would lead him up to coming up with the plan to hurt this poor woman on October 31st, 2005. So after the testimonies of colleagues, Braunstein's victims, Jane Larkworthy, his other previous spouses, as well as expert testimony, Braunstein would be convicted of kidnapping, sexual abuse, robbery, and several other felonies on May 23rd, 2007. Braunstein would be sentenced to 20 years to life for what he had done. His father, Albert Braunstein, thought this sentence was harsh, stating, quote, "I think this sentence was very harsh. It was like he killed somebody," end quote. However, Braunstein's defense attorney, Robert Gottlieb, said that the Supreme Court Justice Thomas Farber could have imposed the maximum penalty of 25 years to life, so he could have imposed more than what he gave him. It wasn't the absolute harshest sentence that he could have given. The defense tried their best in this case to prove that Braunstein was mentally unstable and that he shouldn't be held accountable for his actions in this crime. They had experts there, they showed brain scans, but it wasn't enough for the jury. It would only take the jury 4 hours to convict Braunstein for the kidnapping and the torture of this woman for 13 hours. And I don't blame the jury in this case. It seemed very thought out and planned. Braunstein himself had said that he had committed the crime and had planned it. He obviously was mentally unstable in that way, but he knew what he was doing when he did it. He dressed as a firefighter, somebody who is one of our frontline workers and is supposed to protect us. We are supposed to be able to trust them. And he even caused smoke in the hallway so that the woman believed that there was an actual fire. You can't deny that the crime was completely planned out, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He tied her up, and then he went on the run for 7 weeks. I don't think he knew what he did was wrong if you went on the run for 7 weeks. In fact, he had stated at one time that in Tennessee, he was pretending to be a Hurricane Katrina victim in order to stay undetected. Interestingly enough, news stories about Peter Braunstein and even what he is doing now in jail are all over the internet. If you search his name, a lot of the stories and the articles that I found that automatically came up weren't about the crime. There was a couple things about the crime, but some of them were about the TV shows he was watching in there. There was a couple things about books that he wanted to read, but he's not allowed because they were books about sexual assault. One of them's about J.C. Dugard. It's just really interesting to me that some of these news outlets are giving him a way to get attention even after what he did. He is not who we should be giving attention to. Instead, the time that's being put into writing these frivolous articles about stuff that he's doing in jail really should be focusing on what we can do to combat these kind of crimes and keep them from happening, especially when somebody like him, who had a past history of he would watch abusive porn and he would do weird things with his ex-girlfriends. Like, there was signs of something like this potentially happening in the future. Perhaps Braunstein's crimes were just really to get media attention, and it seems like that's what he's getting. So he's getting exactly what he wants. Any of the articles said that he doesn't really seem like he has any remorse, and it's just really sad. My heart goes out to the victim of his crime because I'm sure she has a tremendous amount of mental trauma from this incident, and I couldn't even see how she would feel comfortable around firefighters again. I mean, she trusted somebody into her home that she thought was there to help her, and they tied her up and held her captive for 13 hours. Her experience was super traumatic, and my heart goes out to her. That is all I have for you on the case of Peter Braunstein. However, if you want to take a super deep dive into it, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, there is plenty of things on the internet about it. But I highly recommend the article by Vanity Fair. It's down in my description box under my sources. That one is super in depth. There are some things in there that I did not talk about. I didn't want the video to be entirely too long. I wanted to talk about the meat of the case and that's it. But if you want to know more about like some of the things that he did prior to what happened and some of his odd behavior, and there's even an article down below in the description box that is from one of his former colleagues or friends that helped him get his job that he had gotten fired from. That's down there as well, which is super interesting. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole, this case is definitely one that you can do that with. As always, if you have any questions or case suggestions that you would like to send to me, you can send them to killerconceptsvlog@gmail.com. And before I forget, if you did not do so already, please make sure to hit that red subscribe button down below and turn on your post notifications so you do not miss any future content. You can also follow me on social media. I'll post when my video goes live on there, that kind of thing. You can always find it on that Instagram, but I also have my whole link tree down below. As always, before you go, just remember that the world's most dangerous minds hide in the most unlikely places. Stay safe.